Yep.
Hello, good morning.
And good afternoon to those who.
And good afternoon to everyone. Good day, everybody. You are welcome. You are welcome. Thank you for joining us today. The SANA Managing Social Media Crisis, Understanding the Do's and Don'ts. This is a live LinkedIn session, and we welcome you all into the room.
Yeah, I think
Great to
we.
see everybody. Can you please put in your emojis? Can you hear me clearly? Could someone please go on mute just to confirm that you can hear and see us clearly? This is going to be a very interactive day, a very interesting topic. We want to be sure that everyone has got the connections that they require to be a part of this fantastic process today. Have we got any confirmations in yet?
Yeah, we have. We've
Oh,
gotten in.
fantastic.
Emojis.
So fantastic. So hi, Shola. Oh my goodness. It's so great to see you and have this conversation with you. I want to thank you for, even just putting this together, hosting this fantastic conversation. We hear a lot about social media. We hear a lot about crisis, but bringing them together to really understand that there is a way out of the crisis of social media and this new phenomenon that has hit us. So we have so much to discuss today, and we have a very diverse audience with us. And because we have a very diverse audience with us, we're really looking forward to the diverse inputs that are going to come in from our conversation today. And for that to happen, we're looking forward to having all of our participants to really send in messages, comments, questions, emojis, and be a part of our conversation today. And once again, you're welcome to the Shola Abula and Associates hosted and powered conversation on the Managing Social Media Crisis, understanding what to do, what definitely not to do, and how to survive any crisis in the social media space. So before we go into the real meat of the matter, Shola, I would just like to say hi, welcome, great to see you, and just give you the floor to introduce yourself and welcome, the audience into this conversation. So over to you, Shola.
So thanks, Darbani. So hello everybody, and so welcome to Managing Social Media Crisis: Understanding the Do's and the Don'ts. Thank you for joining. I see we have about, let me see, about 33 people on, which is really great, and we hope that more people will join. So typically we just, and I hope you can hear me really well. So if there's any, I mean, well, I guess if you have any feedback, you're not hearing me well enough, just drop it in the comments chat, and we can see that. We know you can't speak, we can't hear you, but at least you can put it in the LinkedIn comments and we'll pick it up. So this is going to be a conversation. We're just going to be here for like an hour, and I'm the principal consultant of Shola Abula and Associates. We are a consulting and training firm, and we help businesses, brands, and organizations achieve their objectives through strategic communications, organizational effectiveness, and reputation risk management. And in our training, we do a number of, we take about 5 courses on different aspects of communications, and we just try to build capacity. So even though we practice on the consulting side, we also do a lot of training on that side just to build capacity with people within the profession who would like to know more. So this month, we're talking about crisis management, and this LinkedIn Live is part of that, where we're going to be now focusing on social media crisis. And we know that that's really topical for now. So bring your questions, bring your comments. Darbani, my sister, friend, colleague, everything, she's going to be moderating the session. So back to you, Darbani.
Well, thank you, Shola. Thank you so much. This is a very nostalgic moment for me because, for a couple of years in our corporate careers, we sat down and we managed corporate communications for a leading international energy company. And it seemed as though we were always in crisis, but we always came out of it calm. And really, it was because we were prepared. And really, preparation is everything. And for the fact that we are here today and our fantastic participants are here today as well shows that they're ready to be prepared to ensure that whatever comes their way in the social media space, they can handle and handle well. So thank you for having this conversation. So we used to sit together in what we call the crisis room, and I will just call this the SANA crisis room for today, if you allow me to tag this room as that. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you. So Shola, I mean, let's look at the generations past. We represent different generations, going through whether from the baby boomers right up into the alpha generation that we have now. And I know that we are from the same generation. And I won't name the generation we're from because we look fabulous. But the point about it is that in our generation, we were really, all our information and communications came from traditional media. We're talking about through the radio, through print, newspapers, magazines, and through the television. And even then, at a certain point in time when I was really young, the television aspect of it was even just for a certain period of time. It wasn't 24 hours. But here we are in the world today, where we have 24-hour television, 24-hour traditional media. But in the early 90s, there was the phenomenon that came in, the internet. And then it commercialized into the World Wide Web. And we were like, oh my goodness, we are globalized. We are so connected. And just as we were trying to chew into this phenomenon, in our generation, slam came social media, commercializing itself in the, towards the end of the 90s and really just coming strong. So here we are 30 years into the space and we talk about memory. So let's talk about memories, keeping memories. News reports were either stored in your mind or stored on hard copies. And so when you look at all the news and the things that we see on television, the magazines, the newspapers, if they weren't scanned and saved or stored in a place, they would be lost. In fact, anything that came in any form of paper, eventually, especially particularly in Africa, it became a tool for merchandise. So you would see it used as street food, or used in our households for various reasons, but not really to contain the memory. And the memories of the stories got lost in the people as they passed on and as they age. But we are in a different age now. Yep. Social media and the internet is not as forgiving. Every single thing we do is forever. Yep. And that record is there forever and ever and ever. So this is a whole different dynamic, a whole different landscape of communications. And so having said that, I think it's really important because I know that everyone in our audience today has a different perspective in terms of what it means to them. So let's pool everyone together so that we can carry everybody along and ground them in this conversation. So Shola, in your opinion, what is a crisis? And what is the difference between just a crisis and a social media crisis? So please, we want to hear from you. What is it?
That's a power-packed question. So anyway, and thanks for that context, because I think it's important for, like I said, we straddle different generations. We have about 50-something people online right now. And I think that history and that context is very important because it really makes you know what has changed. And also why I think a lot of people are having challenges grappling with the implications of the change. Good. So a crisis, there are many definitions. Some people will say a crisis is a time of great difficulty and danger when a decision needs to be made. And I think that's a generic one. But for the purposes of today, I would talk about the crises definitions I saw on the internet. Then I will talk about the definition that works for me, which is what we learned in our oil industry experience and the particular company that we worked with that was a crisis management guru. Till today, I think the one, out of all the skills I have, the one thing that I think we got from that company that I don't think exists anywhere else is crisis management expertise. And I've looked. Yeah. So for that, I'm eternally grateful. I thank God. I give God the glory, but I thank God for that.
And here we are sharing it for free.
Honestly, full circle moment. So a PR crisis is a negative event. This is a definition I got on the internet, or incidents related to your business or institution that gains traction externally and then affects your reputation. Now, so where I added my own parties, it's a negative event related to your business, organization, institution, your brand, your person. It gains traction externally, and then it affects these three things: your reputation, your license to operate or business continuity, and it's also impacting your stakeholders. Please remember those three things I said: reputation, R; license to operate, L, or business continuity, if you want to use that word; S, stakeholders. If those three things are being affected, in fact, of which the most critical one is reputation, you are in a crisis. By the time your phone is ringing from dawn till dusk, and people are talking about the same thing. When I say stakeholders, it can be family members, it can be investors, it can be friends, it can be colleagues. Everybody is calling you about one story, one thing that happened. you are in a crisis and is affecting your reputation negatively, is likely to affect the way people look at you in terms of your business and your ability to stand in that role, you are in a mega crisis. It's different from an issue, but I won't go there for now. So once it affects those three things, you are in a crisis space, particularly if the attack is on your reputation. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make. They are too busy defending, maybe defending themselves, and nobody is protecting the reputation. In a crisis, the only thing what you watch over is a reputation. Absolutely. Forget about the business at that point. Is your reputation, because once the reputation goes, the business will go too.
Yeah.
So don't defend the business, protect the reputation. Anyway, so social media crisis is now when this negative activity is happening on a social media platform. And Davuni, the context that you gave is very good, because it is also possible, like you said, back in the day, that kind of crisis would be happening. Maybe it was in your school, it was contained. Absolutely. So it was like, okay, people in school knew that this thing happened. There was this thing that happened in school. In fact, many of us, that's how we got away, and people were able to move town and live a different life, because you understand?
It didn't spread. There wasn't no documentation.
Exactly. You come and rebrand yourself somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that now, because the internet does not forget. And it leaves a digital footprint that nobody can wipe out. Absolutely. So the difference between social media crisis and every other crisis is containment, the inability to contain it. Finish. I will just stop there.
In fact, that makes it even more of a crisis. And, and you've actually answered the next question that I was going to ask is what makes it different? What makes social media, crisis is different from a big crisis? And really is that word is perfect. Containment. You can't contain it. It's like an uncontrollable wildfire, that you have to douse down. And I really like the impact that you put and the spotlight you put on reputation, because the perception of people, the perception is what really makes your reputation and makes, the success of your business. And so when we talk about crisis, I remember in the course of my training with the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK, we had a trainer, his name was Dave Mason, who's into like media and crisis training. And he had this fantastic analogy of the kinds of crisis that we had. He actually said that we have two kinds of crisis. One is like a cobra, and then we have the crisis like a python. And so if you know those particular reptiles, the snakes, for the cobra, it strikes very suddenly, and it takes you by surprise. That's
the what you're squeezes you.
Absolutely. But the python is slow. The python will wrap you around, squeeze you, crush your bones, the whole process. Wow. So it's like a slow burning kind of incubating kind of crisis. And, in both situations, the way we approach those kind of crises would be different. But like I'd like to always quote, and I think a lot of people quote that a lot as well, if we fail to plan or prepare, we're really planning to fail. And that's something that Benjamin Franklin said. He's one of the founding founders of the US. And so that takes me into the next question. Looking at this analogy, the two types of crisis, what are the different kinds of social media crisis? And how would we respond to them? I can imagine that there will be so much, but please, I just want to hear what you have to say about that. What are the kinds of social media crisis?
Thanks, Darby. You know the answer to this question as well as I do, but for the purposes of this session, let me answer. So there are different types, and I only ran through a few, but what I would like to hear feedback from people online as well, because I know we're all in this space, and many of you may even have had personal experience with this, either somebody close to you and that kind of thing. So there is what I would call there is like the fake news, misinformation, viral video type of social media crisis. There's the one where offensive tweets or posts came from a corporate account. That can also be a crisis depending on what was said. Sometimes it's a mistake. Somebody forgot to change their account. Sometimes it was actually a statement that was pushed out, and a large segment of people found it offensive. We had something like that happen. We've had that happen in the past. So, but then I won't call it a crisis until it becomes a really big thing. But sometimes that can actually spiral into a crisis. Statements from CEOs which did not go down well. And sometimes the CEO will have said the thing in the event. The people there did not have an issue with it. But somebody now does a screen grab or a video and post it online. And then all of a sudden, all of the online family members are like, what? Who? Why? Who? What does he mean? and then it becomes an issue. So again, which is why you need to be careful when you're going out to some of these public events. Anything that you don't want seen going viral, please don't do it. So scandals from senior executives, people who are the face of the brand. And that's another thing. I think a lot of senior executives don't realize that you are the face of the brand. And when you see other people can do certain things, but when you do it, it's going to be associated with a big brand. For that reason, it has a higher probability to go viral, because it's no longer just this person doing so and so and so and so. It's now this brand. They will tie it with the brand, and that will then give the story traction. Then controversial actions taken by leaders, e.g. the man, the CEO, the American CEO that fired his employees through Zoom, things like that. We've had a few of them in our part of the world as well. Also, candid camera recording. So people speaking and you didn't realize that you were being recorded, which happens again. And these days, people can do that with your phone. So, they don't even know. So blackmail videos, morality scandals, investigative reports, when people actually go in, and they, there's a camera going to your factory and we are seeing that you do dubious things behind the scenes and all of that, and then sometimes it could just be whistleblowers from within the organization. Somebody came out and said, this is what's going on, harassment, that kind of thing, or WikiLeaks dumps. We've also seen that happen where, some leaks came out from the organization and everybody was just so that. So it could be anything. But once it gets on social media, it's an issue, because the probability for it to go far is then there. So I hope that is a good rundown.
Yes, it is. And it's also a bit scary, because this is almost like a big brother thing where you are never really alone. And I think it spotlights the importance of really identifying what our risks are and really managing those risks, because social media has ballooned into this huge thing where it doesn't really matter where or what or when that space is. So once it goes into the social media, you have, the public courts, right there, making their comments and making it into this huge thing, which could be positive or negative. And so what are the common mistakes that, we make when we go, or if an issue happens with social media? And Shola, I know that we have a very dynamic and diverse audience here today. Not everybody is looking at this crisis management topic in social media through the lens of corporate reputation. It could be like personal reputation, personal branding, or you're managing that on behalf of someone, of a client, of a business, of a brand, not particularly having a hierarchical structure that comes with the corporate world. So I really want you to give some of the examples that touch on all of these different dynamics from our audience in space. But what are the common mistakes that we make? Because we can't run away from social media. Social media is here to stay. It impacts us. It impacts our mothers, our grandmothers, our grandparents, and us in the same way that you've just described. So please share that with us as we also look forward to hearing comments and seeing if there are any questions coming through in the chat box as well. Over to you, Shola.
Thanks, Jarbonit. So I think common mistakes, one of the and there are a number of them. The most common one is to think that it will blow over. I hear that a lot, particularly from people of the older generation. Don't mind them. They're just making noise on social media. Nothing will happen. Meanwhile, the whole world is hearing. And, so the first one is to ignore. That's a big, that they ignore it, they trivialize it, they underestimate the impact. And then some of them, another common mistake is playing ostrich. In other words, bury my head in the sand. Let me just lie low. When they're tired, they'll move on to another thing. I think we should learn from what happened to the British royal family. Nobody moved on recently, as in nobody moved on. They kept waiting for people to move on.
And we haven't moved on. We're still waiting.
Until they addressed it. Do you understand?
Yes.
I mean, so it depends on the issue.
That was
sometimes they may move on, but you can't just assume. And when when conversations are happening all over, which is important, when you have social media crisis, you need to monitor the scale of the conversation. If it's very high and interest, and then there are what you call amplifiers, in other words, other things happening or context or history that amplifies that situation, it's not going to die just like that. Anyway, another common mistake is overreacting. So sometimes something, and we saw that happen in our tomato paste, our famous tomato paste example in Nigeria, which I will not mention the name of the brand, but most of us know that. So something that ordinarily should just have been an incident or an issue, there was a big overreaction, which has now amplified into a full-blown crisis with
Absolutely.
a digital print that goes all the way to America, Reddit forums. I mean, wow. That for me, that is like, if I want to say my top 3 worst social media, how not to do social media, yes, the tomato paste review is an iconic one. It's iconic. Classic overreaction. So you can see two extremes. One extreme says ignore it to blow away. Another one says, no, we must do it, and then does all the wrong things. So and it's still not over. I mean, but yeah, but for me, as far as I'm concerned, yeah. So they were so busy trying to defend themselves, nobody was watching over the reputation and the damage to the brand is the most shocking thing I've ever seen in my professional life. So escalate. Another one is when people now escalate the issue by amplifying the response. So in social media, this is the delicate thing, and I think it's important I say this here because I don't know if we'll have opportunity to talk about this later. One thing we learned when we did crisis management training, I'm sure Dabino, you remember this, is that when you have a crisis or something is blowing out of proportion on social media, you have to first find out where the conversation is taking place. So you make sure that your response you don't take your response to where it's not needed. You are not now
Absolutely.
the one. I mean, I've seen many cases where it is the response that I see. I was not even aware of the initial issue, but the response is what I now see. And then I now realize, oh, so there was actually something that happened to this company or this brand. And then I now go and check. So sometimes, but I do know that sometimes you may do that because even though it happened on social media, it has hit maybe your investors, your shareholders, then you need to put out
Absolutely.
a public statement to address that. But you need to really weigh it very well before you take the response outside of the space in which it's happening. I don't know, I won't go into details, but there was one when Drabini and I don't know if you were involved, but there was once we had to deal with a fake news viral thing that happened, and it was occurring on
Absolutely.
WhatsApp and Facebook.
Yes, in one channel, and we
Yes.
had to address it in the channel
In
which
those
the
channels.
conversation
We
was
didn't take it
happening,
anywhere.
or it would have diffused. And that is
Absolutely.
just really correct. And I know, Shola, you have quite a few more, but I just wanted to expand on this, in terms of having the conversation where it is relevant. So like you said, of course, there are different places that different people meet. Your shareholders meet at a different point of communication. Your followers or the people who are your customers or your clients, they not only meet in different places, but then they also understand a different kind of language. And a different kind of language means a different interpretation of how it is you're coming across to them. And so not only do we need to bring in the conversation or the response to a crisis into the place where these people integrate and have a conversation, we also have to speak in a certain language. And I just want to touch upon the language of crisis in itself. It has to be a language that shows concern, that shows action, that shows reassurance, and shows engagement. And that engagement piece is where I'm also highlighting here in terms of meeting people where they're at and understanding the conversation. Sometimes, and when just like with this example that you gave, that has really gone skyrocketed negatively concerning the tomato paste, it's really, sometimes you wonder, are people listening? Are the people managing the crisis listening? And what are you listening to? How are you responding to that? So I know we're going to go deeper, so I don't want us to jump the gun so much, but I'll just throw it back at you, Shola. So we've actually even gone further into our conversation than I expected, because you've already even started giving us examples of how you feel social media crisis was poorly handled. So why don't we talk about best practices now? But I'll just take a moment, if we can just take a moment and look into the chat box and see, is there any comment there, any risk that we need to respond to before we go and deeper into the best practices?
I think the comment, I see a comment from Chioma Aniwe saying that I think she was responding to what I said about the tomato paste saga, and she says they came to a pen knife fight with a bazooka, and that yes, it hardly ever blows over without serious damage to the brand. Yes, and I think the important thing here was that they were not nobody was protecting the brand, and that whole consciousness about the reputation is what you protect. I personally, honestly, I am on a mission to let people understand that we are all marketing trust. Do you understand?
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people are stuck on the business elements of business. There's nothing that you do on this earth. The reason why anybody listens to you is because they have an impression or a perception about you that makes them think you are worth listening to. That is what you need to protect. Because the minute you lose that, nobody is going to care. What that product that you thought you had, you don't have it anymore. The business, within seconds, it's gone. So what you do is protect the reputation, not the business. By the time you protect the reputation, I mean, of course, you will protect your business, but you protect the reputation because the business will do well regardless anyway. But if the reputation is gone, even for you to start up another business will be an issue, so long as people can put it back to you. And that's particularly if you're in a crisis. At that point, people will now start questioning. That's why we use the term license to operate, because people will now start questioning, really, are you the right person? Should you even really be here? I mean, the kind of questions they wouldn't have been asking before. They'll take their eyes off your business and now start looking at you as an individual.
Absolutely.
Which is why many companies in that situation, if they need somebody to step down, they now tell that person to step down, because they know that at that point, they need to now separate that individual from the business.
Yeah.
And protect the reputation of the business. Yes, Deborah.
Yes. And you're right, Shola, when it comes to that, in terms of the spotlight that is put there and that the fact that we are marketing trust, and how is trust built? You know, you talk about trust, and really, I think one of the foundations of trust is authenticity. People are buying into something and they're feeling that you're coming there as an authentic person, and that authenticity needs to come through, irrespective of what it is that you're selling. Whether you're selling a business, whether you're selling an idea, there has to be a thread and a foundation that links authenticity, that builds the trust. And so when we talk about authenticity, we talk about the importance of who is even speaking on our behalf. What is it? You know, as in, what is it? What is the strategic way that we're going to manage this? Who is speaking? Is that person trustworthy? Is that person authentic? And I see in so many examples that this authenticity of a message always comes through and cuts through, you know. So let's move on.
So sorry, I didn't answer the question about people who have handled well. So
yes, so that's what. So we're going to the people handling well, and I wanted to bring this conversation about trust and authenticity because I know that the example that you're going to give, you're going to also say, oh, the person that came forward to handle this well. I'm sure that's going to come through, and just link what you've spoken about in terms of trust, authenticity, and taking control of the narrative. So please share this example with us, Shola.
So to be honest, I really struggled to find an example of somebody who has handled it well, even though, I mean, when I think about it, we also handled, was that even, well, could we call that, we couldn't call that a crisis, actually. It was more of an issue. It didn't snowball.
I think when we handle a crisis well is when people don't hear about it. I think that's also a measure of success.
Or it doesn't,
if it does not come into any negative public opinion, it's been managed and it's been handled well. So which is probably why you struggle with finding examples. But perhaps if we spotlight where CEOs have immediately addressed or immediately sort of responded positively in a way where people could trust again that they were in control of the situation and doing something about it.
So I think like internationally, or rather outside Nigeria, there was the Starbucks example of when there was a case when some African-American men were sitting in the Starbucks coffee place somewhere, I think in the US. And then I think a staff called police for them, thinking, you know, and they were just waiting, they were not doing anything. And the whole thing was videoed on, and it was beamed on social media, and everybody was like, oh, Starbucks is racist and all of that. Of course, the CEO, they reacted almost immediately. They apologized. I think they shut down the place temporarily, sent their staff for sensitivity training and all of that. I think they also reached out to the men involved and all of that. It went, I think it was about 2017 or so, I'm not too sure of the time, but I think that was handled relatively well. So it didn't snowball more than that. But even within that short time, hashtags had come up, there was conversation. I remember seeing that video itself, and I think that was around before George Floyd also. So a lot of those racial tensions, a lot of that was going on before Black Lives Matter, but it was anyway, but they handled it really well. And I think back to your point about the 3 C's, where in crisis communication, you talk about care, commitment, and control. So they did express regret for what had happened, and then they they said they expressed what their commitment is, that we are a company that is we do, I mean, we're committed to always being inclusive, and we do not discriminate. And then they took action, which is training their employees to make sure that doesn't happen again. And since then, we haven't had, Starbucks has like how many different outlets in the US and other parts of the world. We haven't had any case like that. So I think that was well handled. We also had a similar example, which again, these are not really crises again. So what happens most of the time is, like Dabuni said, when you have an issue and it's not well handled, it's more likely to snowball into a crisis. There's no crisis that just happens without indication, except natural disasters or terrorism or those kind of security related things. But when they are business related, there is something. It's either there is an issue that nobody was paying attention to that now snowballs into a crisis.
Absolutely.
And then what you then do in the next 24 hours will determine whether it's going to evolve into a complex crisis or not. So that quick response, which they did, so we had KFC Nigeria also had a little issue last week in one of their branches where there was also an issue about somebody not being allowed to come in, and that had a lot of undertones because there were different views on different sides, but they responded pretty well. And they apologized, and they also said, in fact, they followed almost the Starbucks model. When I was comparing the two, it was almost like word for word they did, but they're both.
And Charlotte, before you continue, when I look at Starbucks, the issue of the Starbucks and the fast food issues as well, coming out of crisis does not mean that it's going to douse the conversation or there won't be criticism. It's just that you're taking control of the narrative and you are demonstrating that you're doing something positively to make it better. And so there was criticism about some of the approaches that Starbucks took. A lot of them saw it as whitewashing, that, you're finally training your staff on diversity now, should we really believe you? And there's a lot of blaming and shaming. And, we find, and we have seen with mergers and acquisitions where corporations come down, there always seems to be a scapegoat, whose neck is put on the place. Do you think that is a good approach, where you have to demonstrate that you're making a change by firing someone or someone coming out? Is that part of accountability? Do you think that that's something that should be brought into the social media space? And then another question, in terms of authenticity and truth, people coming forth, I think, can you speak a little bit about just the human aspect of it? How apologizing for doing something that you think is wrong is human, but not necessarily saying that you are liable for the consequences. So could you just touch on that as you go ahead with your examples?
So thanks, Dabrin. I think this is a good question. On the issue of whether it's right for you to fire somebody, just to show accountability on a social media crisis. For me, I don't make a distinction between a social media crisis and, in that it's really about how serious is the issue. For instance, what's going on with Boeing right now? We all know about the whole aircraft issue and all that. I even did a write-up on it on LinkedIn 2 weeks ago, where I talked about the prognosis, and I said that their reputation had been so damaged, they were so busy responding to the regulatory issues and all of that and talking to their employees, that they were not really watching over their reputation. Nobody was, taking cognizance of the fact that your reputation is going to the mud. People are afraid to enter. They're beginning to say things that normally they wouldn't say. No one was watching that. So last week, there was a whole agitation that was driven, I think, by the unions and things like that. The CEO had to step down.
Yeah.
So they're now in the process where they're actually selecting and saying that the person who is going to come up will be somebody who has engineering experience. And the CEO had to step down by himself. And honestly, but even though he says he steps down, we all know that, it was clear. He just did not have the confidence to have carried on. And he didn't need to get to that space. So Boeing was a perfect example of, it was playing out everywhere. You can't even call it social. It was playing in real world. Things were happening in regulatory space, things were happening in the legal space, things were happening. Social media was maiming them to death. As in, people will get their flight tickets and be like, thank God it's not a
Absolutely.
So it wasn't just a social, it was a full-blown crisis and going on for it. So it's been happening from last year or even the years before, with the first incident that happened with the 737, but it became worse, this year over the incident, and they were just not doing anything. For me, that was like,
and it's not about doing something behind the scenes internally. Yes. You have to be seen publicly to do something.
Thank you. That's
and,
the issue.
And every example you have said has touched on the three key things you said about crisis. When you look at impacting reputation, Boeing had that issue. Impacting the licenses to operate, where we look at the legal aspects, you look at the regulatory aspects, and then when we talk about business continuity, as a customer, looking at that ticket and like, oh my goodness, this airline, do they fly? Do they use the Boeing? And that directly impacts the business. So really, at the end of the day, someone really had to come out and have be the sacrificial lamb, or really just step down because perhaps their capacity was not broad enough to manage that particular situation, and they needed to be a change, a shift.
So on that point, that's a very good point, Dabuni, and because what is crisis leadership, that's the point.
Absolutely.
So as you and I know, in crisis, it is the CEO that leads the crisis, not the comms people. The comms people advise, but the crisis leader is the business leader.
Absolutely.
So if you have a business leader that does not understand crisis management or reputation management, you are in trouble, which is what has happened in all the cases where things have gone wrong.
Yes.
Because the comms person can only advise based, as in, if the crisis leader doesn't agree, you cannot go ahead and I can't release a press release if my crisis leader doesn't approve the press release, or doesn't think we should say anything, or doesn't think we did not, thinks we did nothing wrong, so we can't apologize. So in all those cases, crisis leadership is actually the issue.
And how do we manage crisis leadership? And so as communicators, we have a place in the crisis room where we craft the messages, where we ensure the tone internally and externally are alive, where we ensure that we are protecting the reputation of the brand, of the people, of the whole situation, looking at the pearls. For those who aren't familiar with the pearls, we talk about the critical stakeholders. We're talking about people, we're talking about the environment, the assets, the reputation, we're talking about our stakeholders. So how do we as communicators, Shola, what do we need to do to have a seat on the table to ensure that our leaders are well prepared? And I think this is the whole foundation of this conversation that we're having, preparation for crisis. How do we ensure that, and how can we also advise the leadership or our customers or our clients how to prepare for a crisis as communications practitioners?
Very, very good question. So I think the important thing is, first of all, you need to have a crisis. If you're a big organization, I would assume you have a crisis management plan. And I'm not saying business continuity, because that's what all of you have. During COVID, I was stunned. I joined a webinar once, and they called this crisis management. And I got in and they were talking about contingency planning. I was like, what? They didn't mention reputation once. I was like, is this what people are calling crisis management? My great shock, Dabuni, was to find out that in the organized private sector in Nigeria, outside of the oil industry, they think that crisis management plan is having a business continuity plan. In other words, that's what they think. They think that if I have enough in my warehouse, I have this, that's crisis management. That's why all the faffing around, I'm sorry to see that you see all over the place, because they have no clue. That is about reputation management. It's about crisis response. It's about managing the stakeholders' perceptions, the narrative about the crisis, the sentiment around the crisis, and ensuring that you're licensed to operate on a reputation level. Because what happens when your reputation is attacked in a crisis, after a while, regulators will come in. Before they know it, they seize your license. Before you know anything, they come and shut your office. So it has nothing to do with business continuity planning. That's a separate issue. So what we used to call emergency response, Dabuni, in our former life, that's what they are calling crisis management. So
those are two separate things.
They are two separate things. So emergency response, which is what in the normal like retail, food, fast-moving consumer FCMG life is business continuity planning, is different. So many of them kicked in their business continuity planning during COVID, which was okay. but then they had no crisis management plan because they didn't even know what it was. So crisis management plan was then, and that's why some of them got caught in that whole, what are you doing to your, how are you treating your staff during this lockdown period? Because they were just not looking at those kind of issues, which is what whatever they do. So you have to create that awareness. You have to get training as a comms professional, first of all, and then look for opportunities to train your business leaders. Do crisis management awareness training for your leaders, because when the crisis comes,
it will come as a cobra or a python.
Yes, and then that leader will not be the one telling you, go and call lawyer. Take this person to court for writing review.
Yeah.
At that point, you can't start now telling the person, let's go and attend crisis management training. If you have not created that awareness before then you will be forced to submit to what that person thinks. And there's a lot of education to be done out there. In fact, the reason why, it's like talking about the course, you can see on the screen, we're talking about the issues, crisis, and reputation management course coming up. The reason why we chose to start doing training around these courses is for this reason, because we see that there is that gap.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for me, it doesn't give me any joy outside of, last week I wrote online, I did 4 case study reviews on crisis management. There are many more others that I could do, but I don't like doing them because it looks like you are calling people out. Even if you notice, when I did it on the LinkedIn post, I didn't mention the name of the brand, just like I haven't mentioned the name of the Nigerian brand today, even though I've talked about the review, because I don't like it to be like I'm calling people out. But the point is, there is a gap. A lot of people just do not know how to manage crisis, and there's a way to manage crisis. And like Darbuni said, some of us worked in industries that were high risk, where there were things that could have snowballed into everyday crisis. But because we had the training, we had the expertise, we knew what needed to be done. Yes. But in fact, I don't even want to talk about the ones that happened in the education sector, the ones we've seen in Nigeria. Terrible, terrible management, completely, as in health sector too. They don't know, and nobody's even making an attempt to even say, let me build up my skills or my awareness in this. So anyways.
And thank you, Shola. So we're talking training, the importance of learning and training. And really that just brings us to the next point. So I understand that there's a gap. I've listened to Shola. She's a guru, she's experienced, she helps companies come out of crisis. How do I train myself? How do I get the skills necessary for myself and for my organization? And how do I know when to be strategic and when to be tactical? Is that all part of the training? Because I see that there's a lot of strategy that has to come with crisis management training. And it touches on risk issues management. It touches on reputation management. It touches on the crisis planning and also the preparedness, and that preparedness is what really helps us contain a crisis. Mm-hmm. But then the tactical part of it, which has to do with the actual crisis management itself, our responses, the recovery, the learnings that we get from the mistakes that will make the business flourish and for us to make the right kind of decisions and actions. So I know that you have a course specifically tailored for this. So can you just talk more about the availability of that and how communicators can get in touch with good crisis management training outside of social media copy and paste, of course?
Thanks for that, Darbuni. I think one thing that you said, which I think is very important, is the difference between taking a strategic approach to crisis management and a tactical approach. I think many people are tactical. And if you are in a complex crisis, the worst thing you can do is to be tactical. In other words, you are looking at the nuts and bolts, you're not looking at the big picture. Remember in our crisis management training, remember the first thing we used to do, talk about what is the nature of the problem.
What is the nature of the problem? What is the one sentence that the external audience, not what you feel internally, but what is that one sentence that will be said concerning this crisis? Start with the nature of the problem.
And that framing, I found out that is where success or failure happens. Because, for instance, if I look at the tomato paste review, the CEO framed it as somebody has injured is trying to disturb my business. That was not the issue. The nature of the problem was much bigger than that. In other words, there's a review about my product, which I first need to address in a way to make sure that it doesn't get traction, or I may even just leave it there. The risk, he didn't even think about the risk, the bigger risk of going the route that he's going, which right now, in fact, I don't even know what to say. So the nature of the problem has even become bigger now. By the time they are commenting about your brand on Reddit forum in the US, I don't even understand how that is even possible as a Nigerian brand, because Reddit is 100% US.
Yes.
They don't even comment on a lot of things in the US. If you know that Reddit community,
yes,
they are very focused on their things, very, like cars and, Reddit people, tech. So before Reddit will leave their normal bread and butter issues and open a thread on you have tried, as in really, you need to win an award for, you really
breaking
tried.
through.
Honestly, in a very negative way. So because they were not strategic, because if you are strategic, you look at the big picture. Crisis management about the big picture. You think about, okay, what is at risk? My brand. I remember there was a crisis management training we did last year with NAPI, and we had a lot of people coming in, and there was one chief executive in the room. And I was very intrigued because all the other people were professionals, and I was wondering what made this chief executive come and attend this training with practitioners. By the time I spoke with him, I realized that he was, those unique business leaders that you meet, that they just get it, as in the dream business leader that any comms person would love to work with. He said, look, that there was a time, so apparently he's in the energy industry, there was a time there's a supply thing that they do for players in the industry, working with regulators. I can't say too much, but there was a contractor that was working for them that then he messed up the order or the delivery. And it was now getting to the point that the customer was getting very upset, and they were all talking among themselves and being like, what's going on? Maybe this provider is not the person we should be using. And he said his staff wanted to manage the issue operationally with that. He told them, no, they should hands off, that let him get involved. He said, because my reputation is now at stake. So he now got involved with the response, started engaging the supplier, started engaging the customers and the regulators, went round engaging them and making them understand what was going on, the problems, and what they were going to do to rectify it. He said at that point, he wasn't even concerned about whether he was going to make money from that order anymore. He needed to defend his reputation. I was like, oh my goodness, that day, I was so happy because he got it. And despite that, he still came for training. He was telling us something he had already done. So typically, he was actually implementing what you call best practice crisis management, crisis response. He recognized early that it is his reputation that protects his business.
Absolutely.
It is the reputation that goes ahead and creates opportunities. So in our courses, that is what we are trying, that understanding is what we are trying to build as well. So the courses, this particular course is a one-day course. It's online. It's accessible to everybody. Now, I must say, for you to be a crisis management expert, because I see some people, you attend 1 hour course, 1 day course, you come out and be an expert. Sorry, no, you cannot be a crisis management expert by attending a 1 day course. But what you can get are the principles and the concepts of how to think strategically about crisis, and how you can then, within your organization, begin to organize people and things in such a way that when crisis hits, you know what to say, what to do, and most importantly, what to avoid doing.
And managing crisis and even training is not a one-stop shop where you do it once and you just put it in your drawer or you post it on LinkedIn. Oh, I'm trained. No, it's something that you need to continue, like a fire drill. Irrespective of the fact that your house is not on fire, you have consistent fire drills to test, is everything working? Do we have the right holding statements, the right responses, the right people to translate these responses? These are things that you have to actively practice to become a professional and to withhold that. And Shola, when you were talking about this CEO, yes, I mean defending reputation, and you'd find that he was holding it personally because the authenticity of what he stands for was not coming through. And so that is why he by himself had said, look, even though this company crumbles, I by myself, I need to uphold it, take responsibility. And it's really important for us, which sometimes we miss. And I think it's really clear for people who are more in the consumer or marketing space, that it's about the external perception of you, not what you internally think you're doing, but how it's externally received. And for you to be able to respond, you have to have your ears out and the pulse, really always on the pulse, or knowing externally how you're being received, what is the external environment saying concerning the situation. So speaking about the dynamics and the external environment of social media,
So
you know,
sorry, I just
yeah,
wanted to please hold that thought. I wanted
yeah,
to
sure.
say one thing. So I think, and this is my reflection. I've had, we've run about 3 different courses. This is the first time we're doing the crisis management course, and we'll do, I think, another run in the year. But this one is happening on 25th of April. But what we've tried to do on our courses is that we teach what you will not get elsewhere. In other words, concepts and principles, which comes back to knowing the right questions to ask. And in fact, when we had the last course that we had last week on brand strategy and marketing communications, that was the feedback from one of the participants. She was like, in fact, all of them said, we have never seen these things before. And I said, yes, because, and that's why when I get into the course, we are not really discussing tactical things. We discuss tactical at some point, but we are 100% strategic, because if you get the concept and the principles, you can apply it anywhere.
Absolutely.
So that's really what, and I think for a lot of people, why people struggle, because honestly, even, the way people struggle with responses is they just don't understand the concept of crisis management, the concept of a crisis, the concept of a social media crisis, and the principles around crisis communications, crisis response, crisis management. All of these things I've talked about, they have principles, they have concepts that are universal, that are time tested, that are replicable. So, like I always say, there's a science and there's an art of communications. Unfortunately, in our part of the world, we focus on the art and we ignore the science. We do not look at the data. We do not look at the insights. We do not learn the concept. We believe once I'm in this space, I should be able to do it. And that's why you have the kind of results that you have. Sorry, back to your question.
Yeah, and so yeah, Shola, you're so right about that. We need to really learn the strategy behind it. And really, I like what you said concerning how these principles can actually be used across board in your personal life, in your family, an individual crisis. You would see that it is a tested thing, that really goes down to the root and the application across board, or, all across board. So let's talk about AI. We can't leave this crisis room today without talking about AI, artificial intelligence, our friend that is here to stay, our friend that looks like us, tries to sound like us, tries to replicate us, but really cannot be. So let's talk about fake images, fake representations, and its impact on social media crisis management. Recently, in the American space, of course, gearing up to the elections, there's been a lot of that where you actually think that you're hearing the sound of a prominent figure. It sounds like him. It may even slightly look like him, but on a closer look, you now realize this is not what he said. And, and when you just look at that, it's a bit scary. So please, can you just speak a bit about how AI is impacting the social media space and how we can manage that in the crisis scenario, and how brands can really protect themselves from, the phenomenon of artificial intelligence?
So thanks for that. And yeah, you're right. We can't get off this call without talking about fake news, or about AIs. So artificial intelligence, I think the sense I get from that, first of all, I thank God that I had been trained on crisis management and also on social media complexity before all of this came up, because I already have that rigor in place. So I am just applying it to this. So there's a big risk. What it means that you have to be on your toes, because if anybody can really create an AI and send out a fake message about you, so you have to be able to know how to respond and also how to assess the situation. Like we had talked about earlier, a big part of crisis management is crisis response. So if you are running a campaign, like the example you gave, presidential campaign, and somebody sent out fake news or a deep fake video about you, and it's gaining traction and people are seeing it and people are taking it seriously, then you may have to respond to it. And you have to have a team that understands what they need to do, and they are able to think and reason well, and they understand and they are trained. In fact, for me, that's just the thing, because I find out that many times you can't even have before you and I can have a conversation on crisis response that is at par. We must be thinking in the same way. Now, back to your, you must know what I know. Let me, just to bring this home. You know, I do a lot of, I've done crisis management advice for people pro bono. People have come to me, advise me on personal issues, some educational issues. Now, the funny thing for me, Darbon, is that, do you know that I can always tell how a crisis is going to play out? In fact, the article I wrote 2 weeks ago, I used 4 case studies. 3 after that, what I predicted. Because it's principle. When I see your response, I follow the conversation. I can already tell you are doing the wrong thing.
Where it's going.
I can tell you. There's nothing. There's no you. I can tell you are there. You are in trouble. Yeah, and it's going to get worse. And then I can tell the point at which you are reining it in as well. So I have not been, the 4 case studies I used. In fact, one of them, since then, it has just been negative. The one, you know, the tomato paste, that one, that was after what I wrote was when it now entered, when New York Post, those people are now, it now got into America. As in, wow. By the time CNN, it got to CNN. Meanwhile, all of that trajectory, because it is clear, this is the thing with crisis response. There's a road, there's a path you take, is the road to destruction. So once you're on that path, it's very easy. You can tell, I don't need anybody. You need to get off that path and change lane before the dimensions will change. But again, let's leave it to the people who now.
But that's also part of the positive things that have come out of social media as well. Just the ability, and also the internet,
yes,
the ability to learn, to see, you know, where people made mistakes. Because sometimes when you're in the heat of the crisis, you won't always get it right. But we have, you know, the opportunity to really gather those learnings, you know, from the mistakes other people have made, what they've done right, what they've done wrong, to help, you know, so there's some inexcusable mistakes that you make simply because you're not in the space of learning from others and really training yourself and moving, you know, ahead. And Shola, you know, I can see our time is coming to an end, but I really want to hear from the audience. You know, are there any questions in there? Any comments that anyone wants to raise? You have the opportunity to do that. And if this is also a lot of information for you, you know, if you're a newbie in this space as well, I mean, Shola is open for you to send her messages directly to her company for any questions around this as well. But Shola, is there anything in that space?
Yeah, I can't see any comments, although it's a bit tricky. I may be missing some. Yeah. So, but if there's a question that you would like us to ask, I would please type it in the comments so that we can respond to it before we leave, because we have to bring this to a close very soon. I can see that the comment section, you know, people, I can't really see if there are any fresh comments coming in. So thanks, Cecilia, Ife, Lua, thank you, Favor, thank you, Nkem, talking about the domino effect and all that. Yes. So I think from me, that what you said about the learning from others is really key. So that's the way I hone my crisis management skills, because I continue to do that so that I'm sure I keep testing those same concepts and principles just to see whether it works. And like I said, I've had to, advise. There was somebody that came to me once about something that happened to a school. I normally don't do those things, but, you know, pro bono, the person said, oh, this school has this problem, blah, blah, blah. And I spoke to some of the individuals. I could already tell from the way they were going, the defensiveness of the person in charge, the unwillingness to engage with the feedback that was coming in externally. That is, you know, insisting on looking at appraising the issue from my perspective. I am right, therefore everybody must believe that I'm right. Oh yeah, come and convince me now. And hold my mouth, hold my hands, stop me from tweeting or posting. So I'm telling them that what you are thinking, and I'm also telling you that the circumstances do not even look good, even for you. And so at the end of the day, I gave my professional advice. And I could already tell all of the attitudes. I just knew that, you know, and like I said, I don't do this professionally. I do it pro bono just because somebody called me. And at the end of the day, guess what they did? They went with the advice. So all of the advice I gave them, they started off, in fact, they were very encouraged. Oh, thank you. They went ahead, and I think they went to the boardroom, and then they took the advice of their board and their lawyers, and they continued on their path of being defensive and all of that. And eventually the government came and shut down the school. So, and they refused to address what needed to be addressed. Yeah, you know, so for me, the most painful thing is that these things do not even need to get to this level. Something that you will have de-escalated in 24 hours. You will allow the whole thing to snowball. And then again, another thing the last word that we keep here is that please stop this legalistic approach to crisis management that we all have. It's not every issue that requires a legal response.
Absolutely.
These are all the things that when you don't have the training or the knowledge, you know, I see people, you know, they say, oh, my lawyer told me not to say anything. And at the end of the day, as if the lawyer can even predict the outcome in court. So even when you finish that legal process, who is going to repair your reputation? Is it your lawyer?
And that really comes to the point of meeting the conversation where it is being had and speaking in the language in which the recipients would understand. And honestly, crisis is such an interesting subject. I think because it actually touches us all. We've all been in one crisis or the other, or we've experienced a crisis vicariously, you know, and there's so many ways that you can come out of it. But one thing for sure is that from what we've learned today, which is so much, you know, we can anticipate having a crisis. I think we can all safely say that as human beings on earth and in the social media space, anticipate that social media handle you have on Facebook, Instagram, you as an individual, anticipate that there may be a crisis concerning your business. And in that anticipation, you must prepare to be trained and have all of the barriers in place to be able to manage that crisis. So whether it is something that stings you like a cobra, or if it's something that incubates for a long time, once you're prepared, you can handle it. And you can actually turn that as an advantage for yourself and your businesses or your clients or whatever it is concerning your brand and your reputation. So we've spoken so much, and I really hope that our audience has really been with us and been a part of the conversation, and they're much more confident in how they're going to emerge, you know, hopefully stronger in the social media space. So thank you for joining us. But I'd like Shola to just close out to thank the audience, and if there are any final words you'd like to say, particularly concerning the course that you have concerning issues and risk and crisis management coming up later on this month. So over to you, Shola. Thank you.
Thank you, Darbani. Thank you so much for moderating and being here. And thank you to all 69 to 72 participants off and on who have been here. I know some people are probably having different, you know, like connection issues and all that. But thank you for staying through and being here. So like Darbani said, and by the way, Darbani moderates all our courses. So the dynamic that you've seen between me and her today, this is actually how it is when we do our online courses. So she makes sure she introduces me. She then makes sure that we stay on time. And then because she's also a comms expert as well, she brings in her insights. We've worked together for so many years, and so the dynamic is great. So if you like what you've seen here today, then please sign up. And by the way, both of us are trained crisis management experts. I need to just put that. So let me explain what a trained crisis management expert is. In our former company, we would go through the training, so like 2 or 3 day training, and then be validated by external global experts. They will then organize a crisis simulation for us, which we will go through real life crisis simulation with things changing by the hour. We would organize our crisis response team, come back into the crisis room to feed it back. At the end of the exercise, they will score us and determine whether we are fit to stay in our roles as crisis communications lead, which I was, and she was my alternate at a point. We had to go through this validation every year. And then we now practiced as crisis communications leads for this big organization working within Nigeria. So you are talking real life experience here, training and application. So we can only share a little bit of that within the courses that are there, but then at least it will set people up on the right track to know what they need to be doing and just how you think about crisis and crisis communications and management. And if you also have to be in an office where you think you need a bit more of an awareness training, I think we can also have a conversation about that. But whatever you need to do, particularly with AI, please get yourself trained somehow.
Yes. Yes. So thank you, Shola. Thank you. So thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have a good rest of the day, and we hope to see you in our different direct DMs. You can reach Shola at her website, www.sholaabuluassociates.com, or directly on social media, Shola Abulu, or at the company website, Shola Abulu and Associates. For me, it's Darbuni Jaime Kori, your moderator for today, wishing you a very pleasant rest of the day. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.